In many ways, the Metroid Prime series feels like it's reached a point of diminishing returns. After having been dormant since 2007, the series was not in desperate need of a new entry. Not everything needs to be in a constant state of motion. If a series has run its course, it would be fine to leave it be, and the Prime games felt like they came to a conclusion with the third entry. The original trilogy had a cohesive visual identity and a narrative through-line which gave the trilogy a strong sense of identity. The studio would go on to make 2 Donkey Kong games, after which they entered a several-year-long development cycle for a project which would ultimately be cancelled. It is not a surprise, then, that development for Prime 4 was initiated not by Retro, but rather by Bandai Namco. The game was announced 8 years prior to release in a direct which showcased no in-game footage. It was announced at a time when the Switch was still newly released and its financial success was not yet guaranteed. Coming out of the underperforming Wii U generation, Nintendo was looking to make a strong splash with its new console, and so they put a lot of effort into having a particularly strong year in 2017, releasing many of the Switch's best titles. After 2 years of development, Nintendo was unhappy with the direction that Bandai Namco was taking with Prime 4, and decided to swap development over to Retro and scrap all of Bandai's progress. This meant that the game did not come out of a particularly strong vision or concept, but rather a need to deliver on an announcement made far too early in development, with a complete game that feels like it was released prematurely despite the 6 years of development. Prime 4 is both iterative as well as derivative. Perhaps the best and worst things I can say about the game is that it works best when it's being iterative, though while it can be nice to slip back into a formula that feels so familiar to series veterans, it doesn't add anything new. Without a strong defining element to the game, I'm left feeling like this game was unnecessary, especially after the vastly superior original had received a re-release 2 years prior. Prime 4's setup borrows heavily from Prime 2, with the sole survivor of an alien race asking for Samus's help to save their species. Samus then needs to travel to various areas of the world to gather a MacGuffin which she brings back to the starting area. In Prime 2, a sentinel of a race called the Luminoth asks Samus to travel to 3 different temples in different areas of the map in order to retrieve stolen energy. In Prime 4, a priest of a race called the Lamorne needs Samus to collect 5 teleporter keys scattered across the planet Vuros. Another aspect of Prime 2 which was carried over were the ways in which different regions of the game world are connected by a single hub. In Prime 4, the hub is Soul Valley, a large empty desert area with the Chrono Tower right in the center. If better executed, I think this area could have been interesting. It calls to mind the 1971 film Walkabout, a film which inspired the direction of the first game. The environment itself could have been a challenge, a new kind of isolation removed from the cramped dark tunnels which we've seen featured so many times in the series, but rather one in which the nothingness of the desert becomes a challenge in and of itself. The game gestures at this framing early on when Samus first lands in Soul Valley and she must travel to Forge on foot. The problem is that shortly after this she obtains Viola, and the desert transforms from an intimidatingly large, hostile expanse into a boring middle space, a highway you take to get to where you need to go. The central hub in both games are attached to more or less self-contained areas across the game map. In Prime 2, with the exceptions of the Seeker missiles and power bombs, your upgrades are obtained sequentially in the same area you are currently exploring. This means that once you obtain the energy from a temple, you don't typically return to that region until the endgame item hunt. In Prime 4, the bulk of most areas are only explored once in order to obtain the teleporter key. You return to the ice belt only briefly to obtain the spider ball, with the item located close by to the entry point of the area. The bulk of Flare Pole is explored only once, with only the entry point being something you return to. The Great Mines are basically a straight shot through, serving more as an action set piece than a maze. One area you are very often returning to, however, is Fury Green. Many people have already made the apt comparison between Soul Valley and Hyrule Field in Ocarina of Time, but I would add on to this comparison by saying Fury Green reminded me of the Temple of the Ocean King in Phantom Hourglass. The player must continually return to Fury Green to talk to Miles in order to obtain a new power-up every time that a chip for Samus's arm cannon is acquired. It's a mechanic introduced to this game by taking away the player's previous ability to simply use the items they acquire as they acquire them, and this removal makes the change feel unsatisfying. While the original Prime trilogy's aesthetic centered around phazon, an alien substance which alters the chemical composition of the animal and plant life it comes to contact with, Prime's 4 aesthetic is centered around both green energy and psychic abilities. The green energy rains down upon the Lemorn, transforming them into grievers much in the same way that phazon corrupted the wildlife of the planet Brio and Elysia in Prime 3. Phazon essentially just got recast because it couldn't be outright incorporated due to story reasons, with the substance having been eradicated at the end of Prime 3. Similarly, almost all of the item upgrades obtained in this game are reskins of Metroid staples. There isn't really anything new here. Occasionally, an item will have a new mechanic attached to it, like how the bombs can now be thrown, but that's about it. The physical beam is the only new item, though it's mechanically identical to the beetle item from Skyward Sword, a game that predates Prime 4 by 14 years. There is, of course, the addition of Viola, the motorbike which Samus acquires early on in her adventure to facilitate travel through Soul Valley. I'm hard-pressed to say anything interesting about it, though, because it never feels like it's incorporated into the gameplay in any meaningful way, instead feeling more like a means to an end. At best, it's a solution to a problem introduced by the developers to pad out gameplay through the introduction of Soul Valley. At the worst, it's awkward to handle. I wouldn't mind how iterative the game was if it only took the best aspects of the previous games. Instead, it insists upon expanding the worst segments of Prime 3, namely the Hollywood-inspired action set pieces, as well as bringing in members of the Galactic Federation as secondary characters. It almost feels like there are 2 games within one, each pulling in a different direction. The first is the older style of Prime game, which is rooted in exploration and isolation, while the other is a straightforward, linear action game, and those 2 styles are at odds with one another. This same dynamic was also present in Prime 3, though that game skewed more towards the isolated, exploratory gameplay, whereas the opposite is true for Prime 4. As a game studio, Retro's strengths have always been storytelling without words. In their Donkey Kong games, this manifests in the way that a narrative is woven through each world, with many having a clear beginning, middle, and end. The narrative is clearly pushed along through cause and effect, with the player getting caught up in the action around them. In the Metroid Prime games, the way that this manifests is through the ecosystem. As you explore Fury Green, you can spot signs of life which point to a larger inhabited world which Samus gets to observe. You can notice a food chain. A crawling bug secretes a bioluminescent mucus as it crawls along the jungle floor. Red leaf ants can be observed walking in a line carrying leaves, presumably taking them to their colony in order to be used for construction. These quiet moments of world building are unfortunately overpowered by the bombastic action set pieces. Speaking of the Federation troops, these characters all feel forced and out of place. Their quippy, Marvel-esque dialogue never allows for any meaningful sincerity, and it feels incongruous with the setting and the Metroid series. While Prime 3 featured Federation troops extensively, most of them had a serious demeanor which felt tonally appropriate. The exceptions were the Hunters, though because they are present in so little of the game, they don't leave a lasting impression. The same can't be said of the Federation troopers in this game, who stick with you for the entirety of the game. They don't ever leave you for a long enough period of time to allow you to forget them. I found them so irritating that I was glad when I thought that they had sacrificed themselves in the Great Mines, and disappointed when I learned that they had survived. This fake-out also cheapened their actual sacrifice, because I kept waiting for the game to reverse course and reveal that they had actually survived the fight. Prime 4's focus on combat is a shame because it has never been a strong suit of the series. The combat mechanics are rather shallow, as they are in all of the Prime games because it has never really evolved to be anything more complex than a game of endurance where the player must shoot the enemy until their life has depleted, strafing all the while in order to avoid their attacks. New and upgraded weapons really only quicken this process rather than change the player's strategy. This game has a lot of action set pieces, but the combat is never interesting enough to keep the player engaged as waves of grunts appear from the cracks and crevices of the game map to attack the player and the current Galactic Federation troop you happen to be babysitting. Bosses are the outliers which manage to break the monotony of combat, because unlike regular enemies, they play closer to an action puzzle which you are figuring out how to solve in real time. The quieter aspects of the game are less successful in their execution when compared to previous installments. This is the most linear a Prime game has ever been, with characters telling you exactly what to do. The game does not allow for sequence breaking, which could be fine. Having to complete tasks in the proper order is okay. That is how many Metroidvanias work. What's annoying is when your progression becomes dependent on the Federation troopers, or when those same characters mislead you. Miles is constantly calling you, telling you what to do all of the time. That advice is usually the game telling you exactly what to do in order to proceed, and the player becomes so accustomed to taking his word at face value that on the rare occasion when he does give you bad advice, it feels all the more annoying. Once Samus acquires Viola after the initial Volt Forge run, Miles tells the player to go to any of the 3 locations now available to explore. The issue is that 2 of those 3 places are dead ends, meaning that the player has no real choice but to go to Magma Pool. Why does he intentionally mislead the player when he has never done so before? It's not wrong to only have one path forward, but the intentional misdirect doesn't work when acting on all of the previous advice yields the intended result. I've seen the sentiment online that Prime 4 is only a stepping stool, and that Retro Studios will take what they've learned while making this game and apply it to make an even greater Metroid Prime 5. Personally, I don't quite share this statement, because when I look at the Prime games, I see a series with great potential, but one whose sequels have never matched the caliber of the original. I think the issues with Prime 4 don't entirely originate from the latest entry, but rather, many can be traced back to ideas introduced in Prime 3, and I don't see anything particularly original which necessarily justifies reviving the series. I don't know if we will see a Prime 5 anytime in the near future, but if we do, I hope it is born not out of a directive from the higher-ups to make a sequel to a dormant series, but rather, Retro approaching Nintendo pitching a solid idea. Retro has made some of Nintendo's best games of the past 25 years, and I want to keep seeing them output games at the high quality I know they are capable of achieving.